So during COVID, not to bring it back to COVID, I actually went through and finished a bunch of them because my mindset was, oh, I got to save those like last two pours for me and someone special. And then I was like, well, I'm never going to see anyone special. So.
What's going on, everybody? It's episode 261 of Bourbon Pursuit. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny, and today is a Bourbon Community Roundtable podcast, so we don't have a whole lot of news to go over, but just a few things. So here's what's going on. Wilderness Trail is celebrating as they have now filled their 100,000th barrel, and they are getting ready to start building warehouse number 6. So congrats to Pat and Shane, Bourbon Pursuit podcast alumni, on this great achievement. Now, you may remember back in 2019 that Buffalo Trace chose 378 charitable partners to receive a special edition from their 6 millionth barrel of Buffalo Trace. And it came as a bottle of Buffalo Trace bourbon and came with some really nice packaging as well, including a piece of the barrel itself. Now, these organizations were there to use these bottles as part of their fundraisers. And to date, 322 of those nonprofits have reported back in, and overall, this barrel has helped raise over $1.1 million. Now, there's still 56 more bottles that are still out there that are be scheduled to go or postponed due to COVID. Now, Pursuit Series news, we released 3 new barrels this week, and one was our private barrel selection with Woodinville, and it sold out to our Patreon community. But there's 2 other barrels, including a brand new rye from an undisclosed distillery, and that will be available to the public starting on Friday, July the 10th. Now, in this episode of the Bourbon Community Roundtable, we discuss the sale of Brown-Forman assets, including early times to Sazerac, and what the continued impact of tariffs could mean to Brown-Forman. Then we put ourselves in the shoes of someone going on vacation to Kentucky to visit the trail. Do we decide if now is a good time to visit, or should you just maybe wait a little bit longer? And lastly, we ask everyone, how do you approach a bottle that may only have 2 or 3 pours left in it? Do you finish it, or do you kind of save it, maybe for a special occasion? Now, don't forget, please leave a review because it helps other people find this podcast and helps spread the good word of Bourbon Pursuit. And have you ever wanted to get barrel bourbon shipped right to your door? Well, now you can. You can get access to their award-winning products right now online. Go to barrelbourbon.com and click the Buy Now button. With that, enjoy today's episode, and here's Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. Over the 4th of July weekend, I was scrolling through my social media, and this story from People magazine just stopped me dead in my scanning. And it was a man who just retired from his profession. He was a doctor. And his family surprised him. They opened up the door, and there in his room was a massive bourbon collection. They had so many great bourbons in there. They had Angel's Envy Cask Strength. They had Old Fitzgerald Bottled and Bond. They had a ton of Willets and a bunch of Wilderness Trail Cask Strength and Bottled and Bonds. I mean, it really was a bourbon drinker's delight. His first comment was, well, I do have a lot of these, but this is awesome. He was really taken aback to see that they cared and understood his passion. This was in People magazine, folks. People magazine. And so you can imagine my absolute delight to see that, to see bourbon had made it over from an everyday bourbon drinker, to People magazine. And then I read the comments. He's an alcoholic. Well, looks like he's going to be drunk for the rest of his life. All people could say was just tear on the man's collection and talk about how he's drunk and how they're glad he's done because, he just shows up to work drunk. People make all of these assumptions just because he had a lot of bottles. Well, I feel very bad for those people because maybe they had someone in their childhood who drank too much and didn't drink responsibly. Maybe they've had someone who was hurt or killed in a drunk driving accident. And see, folks, that's the burden that we have as bourbon connoisseurs. We can't ever take for granted that people do abuse this product, and that when people see our massive collections, or even if we have a few bottles that we post on Instagram occasionally, we can't take for granted that the rest of the world just doesn't get it. So that's why now more than ever in this cancel culture that we all practice the true meaning of responsible consumption. So be kind to one another and drink responsibly. And that's this week's Above the Char. Hey, if you have an idea for Above the Char, hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, or go to fredminnick.com and shoot me an email. Until next week, cheers.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bourbon Pursuit, the official podcast of bourbon, with the 46th recording of the Bourbon Community Roundtable. And we're joined by a bunch of familiar faces, as we always see on here. So Ryan, Fred, good to see you all too. We're going to start getting back in the gear of things here relatively soon and see each other a lot more over the next few weeks too, as we start getting a recording season.
Yeah, I'm so excited about that. You know, we just recorded one last week or 2 weeks ago with MGP, and it was just great to be back in the swing of it. You know, we've been cooped up so much, and man, miss hanging out, boys. Miss you guys.
I know. I missed out on it, so I'm excited to jump back in. But I do like the 9 o'clock Zoom calls. They're nice too.
It makes it a little bit easier, doesn't it?
You don't have to drive around everywhere and do all that. So
that's true. But
I do miss seeing you in person, though, especially you, Fred. I see Kenny Everett all the time. So,
well, we've been doing all our virtual barrel picks and stuff. I mean, like that's been nice to actually do virtual barrel picks every once in a while, just because we're actually able to include a lot more people that really couldn't travel too often. And speaking of barrel picks, we'll just go ahead and move on to our next person here, but Jordan, Breaking Bourbon, because I know you all just released a barrel pick, or doing a barrel releasing one this week as well. So
Leroy Jenkins.
Yeah. So first off, make sure you give yourself an introduction, and then our fun icebreaker for the night. The question is, what's the worst haircut that you've ever had?
Oh gosh.
My
wife's a stylist, so I'll tread lightly.
So this is Jordan from Breaking Bourbon, one of the 3 guys who runs the website. You can find us at breakingbourbon.com or at Breaking Bourbon on all the socials. And always excited to be here. And I think the worst haircut, that'll probably be going back to like childhood, when it was like 1980s, like rat tail in the early 80s type deal. Like that would probably be the worst one. Yeah, man, that was like early 80s type deal. That was super cool. Thank God I outgrew that one.
You braid it?
No, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. But me and my brother were like, apparently we thought that was the cool thing to do. So we begged our parents, and
with the
lightning bolts. They went with it. Yeah, lightning bolts and all.
Too.
Oh yeah. Child of the 80s.
Oh man, I hope you can dig up that picture. Because
that's going to be the next bottle sticker.
That should be. There you go. The next barrel pick, rat tail.
That, or if we can get some of these embarrassing haircut photos to go on like the Bourbon and Beyond promo next year.
There we go.
That'd be glorious. Well, before we move on to the next one, Cecil, you got a bad haircut story?
My hair's been excellent for the past 10 years since I've met my wife, but no, I mean, I had the Jim Carrey bowl cut, when I was in like 3rd or 4th grade, and you match that with like a sun-in experiment down in Florida, and you get like orange hair with a bowl cut. I was really rocking all the ladies.
Right on. All right, Blake, you're up.
Yeah, so I'm Blake from Bourboner. Regular intro. The only one, well, not the only one, because I guess the hosts are always here as well. But undefeated in the Bourbon Community Roundtables as far as appearances. If we call appearances wins, which in my book,
and appearances.
The fact that you just show up should count.
If you've got the jersey on, it counts as a gameplay.
Exactly. No, always great to be here. Actually have a really bad haircut story. My brother likes to tell it with for some reason when I was a kid, my dad would just drop us off at Supercuts, and he'd go, I don't like, it takes 15 minutes to get your haircut. Why do you need to drop somebody off and come back? But he comes back, and I'm like running out of the store. I'm probably 12 at the time with the haircut apron still on. My dad's like, whoa, I still got to pay for this. So I'm like, no, it's free. They like cut a V into, I was rocking the Caesar with the bangs in the front, gelled them down nicely. They cut like a V there, gave me no sideburns. And in hindsight, I should have just shaved my head, but I don't know. We got like 7 free haircuts from Supercuts, and that made me still go back after that. It was very traumatizing 7th grade year. Had to really build the confidence, and that's when the football career really took off, thankfully. So
wear the helmet all the time.
Yeah. It basically looked like they had put a helmet on my head, cut my hair around that, and then we're like, I don't know, it's good. Like, you came to Supercuts on a Friday night and paid $12. Like, what are you expecting here, buddy?
Oh man, the classic story right there.
Yeah.
I'm sure people are loving these.
Somebody's listening to this right now, like, what the heck is this? Like, I thought I downloaded a bourbon podcast. Why is this guy talking about Supercuts? Still got a lifetime membership there.
You got a card and everything you show, like put it down, just like free haircuts for life.
Basically, like, it's that guy again. Let him in. Give him a chair.
Right, before we move on to Brian, Fred, you got one?
Well, I've got a few. I had a mullet in my sophomore year of high school. I had.
Was this like a like on purpose mullet, knowing it was like?
Oh man, I had the snap on. This is when I was like doing like rodeos, and I was riding bulls and doing all these like stupid cowboy things. And everybody in the cowboy world had a mullet, so I had one.
I don't want to see the mullet. I want to see you riding a bull.
Yeah, we have the old VHS tapes at home. I went back and watched them, and I look at them like, I would never even get near one of those things right now. It's like back when you had no fear. And I had a lady who actually cut my ear when she was trimming it. I grew up in a small town, and we went to someone's house. I'm pretty sure she wasn't a licensed a beautician or whatever, and she definitely was not licensed. But I think the worst haircut I ever had was the frosted tips, and probably my junior year at college. And and I would wear tank tops everywhere because I was pretty muscular back then, and I would go around like frosted tips, being like, "Hey, what's going on?" I mean, I was like straight out of that Saturday Night Live crew that was going like that, going into clubs.
Do you have like your puka shell necklace?
I was about to say that.
I had the shell necklace with hemp. I had the frosted tips, and then I would have whatever sunglasses were cool at the time. There's not a lot of those photos that are still around, but it was. And actually, kudos to Blake Stumpf in the chat. He called it. He said Fred had frosted tips. So either Blake's doing some Googling on me, or he just has that insight.
Awesome, Brian, you're up, buddy.
All right. Thanks for having me again. Brian was sipping corn, and I've been watching the comments, and there's a correct guess. Someone said Steven Seagal. I had a beautiful, glorious mullet. Grew up in Michigan, so we called it the Michigan mullet, although that's not the kind with the perm. That's the hockey mullet. And I didn't have that, thankfully, but it was just gorgeous and just had plumage coming out the back. I was very proud of it, and at the same time, it was the worst haircut I ever had.
And it's still on the if you get the special edition of Bourbon Justice, there's a picture of Brian in the back.
Centerfold. I tried to do centerfold, but the wouldn't let me.
The hair was too long.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, I'll tell mine. So growing up in middle school, before you went to school every single day, you'd always catch Saved by the Bell. And of course, Zach Morris was on there. And I think this was also the time in our middle school years was when Zach Morris was starting like the college years. If I remember the college years, he had this slick back hair, like kind of like shaved on the sides, slick back, going back. Yeah, you got to imagine I was like a chubby 6th grader, and I tried doing that. And it was exactly that, shaved on the sides, long, and like it was like coming to a V. I looked like I was like from the Munsters.
I was gonna say like Addams Family style.
Yeah, I mean it was bad. I mean it was shaved back or slick back and everything like that. There is so much gel to make that happen. Thankfully, that phase passed as well.
I remember the gel.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like we're really missing out on that in our hairstyles of today.
Yeah, the gel's not around anymore.
Not
It's
so
we
much.
had
pomade.
gel. We had rad wax. Rad wax made
Moose
the
survived.
flat
Like you
top.
can still find mousse, and then there's like a pomade, that you put on your
That's
hair.
right. That's the stuff they use now, right? It's not
Yeah,
I
mousse.
pomade's
use
still in.
pomade.
Yeah.
And now,
All
when
right,
I had the
let's talk
mullet,
about
I
hair
had.
for an hour.
I mean,
We best get on to whiskey, boys.
Yeah, we better.
John Henderson's
Here
in the
we
chat
go.
is like, is anyone even drinking whiskey? Or-
It's because we are, John.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the problem. We started off early.
Yep.
All right. So let's go ahead and we'll start switching gears here a little bit. So now that we're all back together, it was news, a couple weeks ago, and that was the big purchase of Sazerac buying some assets from Brown-Forman. And namely, the biggest thing that really came out of the whiskey geek side of things was the Early Times acquisition. And for us, we all kind of know that Early Times has become a staple kind of like bottom shelfer in the past. It launched, I think, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. They're sort of like they're bottled in bond, 1 liter. You can only get it. And it's like 22, like $26. I mean, amazing whiskey. We ranked it our number 1 bottled in bond bourbon in 2019. And so it's really made waves. And I think that's what caught a lot of whiskey people off guard was actually Brown-Forman selling that brand. Now, I know, Fred, you had a really good article talking about the pros and cons of where Sazerac and Brown-Forman, they're both making a pretty good deal about this. Can you give us a summary before we start talking about what we think will become of our beloved bottom shelfer?
Yeah, so let's take a look at the whole deal. It involved Collingwood, Canadian Mist, and the distillery in Ontario, which is a workhorse distillery. And I've been there, and Canadian whiskey's on the rise. So that in itself is an important acquisition for Sazerac, which is trying to grow its Canadian whiskey portfolio. And at the same time, those were kind of like, so-so brands and, facilities for Brown-Forman. And Brown-Forman has been hit harder than anybody with the tariffs. They've been very vocal about how much money they're losing quarter after quarter. It's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so, they're cash strapped. They need money immediately because they have shareholders they have to take care of, and they also need to keep the lights on and keep people employed. And so that the Canadian brands make a lot of sense. Now, for those who think that the Early Times brand does not make sense, I would say that you're right in a lot of ways, and that brand was very important and connected to Brown-Forman. But what you can see that they're doing is they're consolidating. They're going to put more focus on Old Forester, obviously, Woodford Reserve, and of course their bell ringer and Jack Daniels. Early Times was actually once upon a time the best-selling bourbon in the 1950s, and there was an actual hearing held at the government back when the government actually validated claims from distillers and said like, okay, you're the best-selling bourbon, let prove it. So they George T. Stagg made that claim, and Early Times made that claim. So the government had them come in and present their case as to who was actually the best-selling bourbon, and they awarded it to Early Times. So it's a little bit ironic that's actually going to the Buffalo Trace, former George T. Stagg distillery. But with that said, Brown-Forman, by getting rid of that little bit of still time that would have been going to Early Times, which might have been 15 to 20%. By getting rid of that, they can open up their contract distillation program, which also gives them immediate capital. And that immediate capital is something that they need right now because they've been hit so heavily. Meanwhile, you have Sazerac, which is just putting their arms around a lot right now. It's a bold move. It's a good move. But we're all focused on Early Times, and that's an important part of it. But the acquisition of that Ontario distillery is absolutely a game changer for a company that's trying to, own whiskey.
I think it's a win-win for both of them, to be honest. Like Fred says, it brings capacity, and you think about Sazerac. What's their bottom shelf brand right now? benchmark, maybe. I mean, and even that hasn't gotten. Yeah, even that hasn't. So I think it gives them a great entry level into that. You got to think about this as like a full picture thing where, you have Wheatley vodka, and that's going crazy because everybody's drinking Wheatley vodka because they could possibly get 2 bottles of Blanton's or whatever it is. So I think it adds to that of having that bottom shelf. It's like, hey, do you support the full portfolio? And as well as, all the points that Fred hit. But it is a little bit interesting. I mean, I think we've talked about it here before of like, why do these brands just bounce around? Why are we pulling historical brands out whenever? Why don't they just develop something of their own? So I think the brand recognition is an interesting part of it, but yeah, overall, I feel like it's a win for both sides.
Well, let's not forget too that Sazerac does acquire the stocks earmarked for early times. So they're getting those barrels as well.
But then what happens, after that? I mean,
so yeah, 4 years.
4 years to figure it out.
I think of one of the great questions that continues to come up is that will early times follow suit with the other allocated styles of Buffalo Trace, which, man, again, nobody can argue with the fact that Buffalo Trace whiskey is fantastic, always really good. But they just have like an allocation program that really rubs independent retailers, the wrong way, especially. And I think, when that happened, that was like the first question that a lot of people had.
Yeah, I'm confused. Like, I mean, I know early times was like making a little bit of comeback with Whiskey Geeks, but I mean, all in all, it's still like a nobody brand right now. I mean, it's been like shat on for 10 years. And so I understand the Canadian whiskey side. I mean, Heaven Hill bought Black Velvet, which is the number 2 Canadian whiskey producer. And like, apparently that's just going to go gangbusters, and they're already bottling the shit out of that. But I don't know. I just don't think early times moves the needle for a lot. Cause every time I tell like regular whiskey drinking folks, what's a good bottle of bourbon, I say early times, they're like, what? That's shit. Like, so more like they got I guess maybe if you put the Sazerac Buffalo Trace behind it, people will get on board.
One of the things that Mark Brown does when he acquires brands is he also like pays very close attention to the histories, and early times is connected to the Charter Oak brand. Minor Case was, a part of early times. I mean, with the early times brand, you have basically a new root system, that they can play with. And it didn't really occur to me until you kind of started talking about that. But early times gives them another facet of the bourbon world to talk about. And let's keep in mind too. Look, Brown-Forman's done a nice job in the last few years with it, but they kind of pulled the plug on early times in the 1980s and turned it into a Kentucky whiskey, which meant they were putting it in used barrels. So they didn't have the passion for that brand as they did with, to your point, Kenny, starting a new one like they did with Woodford Reserve in 1996 and basically, re-championing Old Forester. So, I mean, it's an easy sell for. I mean, it may sound like it's not easy, but it's definitely a lot easier than selling Old Forester or Woodford Reserve, or even a brand like King of Kentucky for them.
You can't blame anybody for what they did with whiskey in the 80s. I mean, everybody had to put things a few notches down. And
yeah. Well, I think the other thing to remember too, and going back to Ryan's point, right? It's not, these aren't just, I'll buy this, this, and this. It's more like, think of the sports analogy, right? When you're making a trade and whoever was in charge of the trade. So if Buffalo Trace really wanted the Canadian distillery in Ontario, it's more, all right, you want that? Well, we also want to get a little bit more cash, so you also have to buy early times, or vice versa, right? If Buffalo Trace is driving the deal, right? Oh, you guys need cash? We'll take your Ontario distillery, but you're also going to throw in early times into the deal, right? It's never like a straight 1-for-1. It's always the convoluted, right? Who's ever in charge of that deal is masterminding it to maximize what they assume is going to be their return, right? For that.
And you're probably right. Everything probably started with the Ontario distillery.
That's it. Yep. That's the linchpin.
It started with that facility.
So how do you think that works, Fred? Are they like Brown-Forman's like they send like a mass email to all the big boys, like, all right, boys, Ontario Distilleries going up for sale. Who's the highest bidder? Or how?
I know how that works. It starts with small group of people, and then NDAs get passed around. I mean, I've been privy to a lot of those things, and to include some distilleries that have been on the block, and then they get rumored to be sold, and then somebody reports that they were sold, and it didn't. There would be like a verbal agreement, but it didn't close. I mean, a lot of these things never close, and so I think that this is I think Brown-Forman, at the moment that they started feeling the pressure and the pain of the tariffs, I think they started looking for ways to salvage their company, because if they have all of this weight on them that isn't producing at the same level as Jack Daniels and Woodford and Old Forester, they have to make some very hard decisions. And I would be looking for other things in their portfolio that's not moving as well. And one of them that kind of blows my mind that they still have it, but I know why they still have it, is Sonoma Contraire, which is a wine, a decent Chardonnay, but to me it doesn't fit their portfolio because it's the only wine in there.
I do like
So
Sonoma Contraire.
why would you say they still have it? For barrel finishes?
No, because Young Owsley, that's Young Owsley's project. That's his baby. And he's the son of Owsley Brown, and to be honest with you, Young Owsley is a sharp mind. He's an excellent contributor to the industry, but that's his baby, and he wouldn't let that go.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little sad when I read it. Not that it's not in bad hands with Sazerac, but it's just Brown-Forman was making.
I'm enjoying the comments though. All the new finishes and the straight from the barrel.
Finish. I have to think that Brown-Forman thinks a little bit of what they've had with the Prohibition styles, the success they've had there, the success that they've had with the Old Forester Rye, that they think really do we need to put the amount of work into the Early Times brand? I think they kind of assume they can.
Well, hell, we did all their work for them.
Well, that's what I mean. I believe they already said in the comments your commission alone off Early Times was like $1 million, Ryan.
Oh, really? Where are these comments? Oh, I'm in the private chat. I didn't see the laptop.
And all you got was that hat.
There you go. I mean,
this is all I got, and I didn't even get it. Kenny gave it to me.
The other thing too to realize with Buffalo Trace, right, from just a strategic standpoint, so they're cranking out warehouses like it's. If no one has not been, right, for those watching or listening, if you haven't been out to Buffalo Trace at all lately, the warehouses that they're building per year over the next, remaining 7-8 years is just absurd, right? And they do have to fill those, right? And I know you could fill it with their standard brands that they have, but it is good to just have market differentiation, as we talked about before, having different price tiers, even when you do micro denominations of just $3 or $4 for each tier, is going to be huge to their benefit, right? So pulling in that Early Times brand will really help them on the low end, because they got a shit ton of bourbon to be bottling, right?
They're pumping out 1,500 barrels.
It's just absurd. So you wait, 4, 5, 6 years, and they're just going to be sitting on a metric ton of bourbon.
Can we speculate on who's the contract distilling for?
Well, here, before we get to there, because the one thing I want to talk about, especially with this shit ton of bourbon, as well as Brown-Forman's sort of footprint in the world, you see a huge difference between what Brown-Forman does on an international level versus what Sazerac does just on a national level. So if these tariffs don't end or nothing comes of it, I mean, is this sale just a Band-Aid on what could potentially happen for Brown-Forman in the future? Or is this something that says we finally got ourselves a little bit balanced, and now we just have to understand that we have to start taking the losses of Jack and everything else internationally and start hedging against it? What do you all see there?
Well, you got to remember too, Brown-Forman acquired a lot of Scotch brands even before the tariffs, so they're getting it from both ends. So I think I wouldn't call it a Band-Aid. I would call it maybe some stitches, So it's like we're past that. The
Like it was really bleeding. Like they were really bleeding out. Is like you're thinking.
They were bleeding. They've got some stitches on there, but now that we have, a year, who knows what this world looks like in a year? I mean, for God's sakes, freaking the bubonic plague is back. I mean, you can't even predict a week without a catastrophe. So who knows? I think that right now this move is really good for Brown-Forman. I actually think it's better for Brown-Forman than it is Sazerac. But I know one thing: Brown-Forman is about as strong of a company as we have in Louisville, and it's just hard to imagine them not making the best decision for their company.
One thing they've done is they've made great decisions all along, and they've proven to be great decisions. And with the way that Old Forester in particular has been rocking, especially with the private barrels, I mean, the Old Forester private barrels have been some of the best private barrels that I've had in the last couple of years. So I like that they're giving it the focus that they deserve, and it's just old in early times, just to, they can do without it.
All right, so let's go back to this this contract distillation. We'll call it theory right now, because I don't know, Fred, if you got an inside story or anything like that. Because I guess if they start doing contract distillation, Cecil's gonna be the first one.
Give
to
me
raise
the
his
number.
Well,
who's co-signing for me?
And so I want to touch on that a little bit, because I think it is a good theory. It's a way that they can get some cash relatively quickly, but it also is impeding on anything else that they might be seeing a shortfall of. And I don't know if there's any shortage of Old Forester or Woodford that's sitting on the shelves. I don't think there is, because everything is like it's like 4 to 6 years old, right? So nothing's too crazy. But if they have their King of Kentucky line, which is much older. Fred, where did the theory come from, and everybody else's? How much validity do you think it has to it?
I love this. Pin him in a corner.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Basically history. Like I know when their contracts went up, and I know how their stills run. Without burning sources, I do have a lot of C-level, friends and elsewhere in the company. And after it came out, after I had kind of put that theory out, I had a couple of people tell me that was good, kind of putting 2 and 2 together. So, it's a matter of like just knowing how the American whiskey industry has been operating for hundreds of years, and knowing what that particular company is going through. And it's a long-standing practice. They were making liquid for Heaven Hill for a long time. They're making it for Michter's for a long time. And that wasn't really out there until, my book came out. So like these things are kind of common knowledge. It just, the people who are promoting the other brands, don't necessarily always want you to have that. And I understand that. Like, but I also think that we're in a different world of American whiskey than we were 15 years ago. Today, the whiskey world's a little bit like the sports world, where we want to know, what kind of calf strain Tom Brady has and whether or not it's going to impact our fantasy football league. I mean, we treat this stuff just like we do sports, and I love that about it. And it's fun for me, but and I don't take any joy in being right about these types of things. Just like I didn't take any joys of being right about what I said the Trump tariffs would do in the New York Times. I mean, I hate this. I mean, I wish Brown-Forman could hang on to their assets, but it is what it is, and they got to do what they got to do. But I do know that I would, if I'm going into the contract, if I need a brand, I'd be calling Brown-Forman over just about every other company.
Do you think you'll see any aged stock on the market?
I think we've already seen it. We just don't know it. I mean, there is that stuff's getting traded very consistently. from broker to broker. Now, what will happen is like it doesn't actually move. The rights to the barrels get traded in the brokerage market. I mean, there's a reason. Like, look, Kenny, Ryan, you guys are independent bottlers. You see the availability of what's out there. It is not a coincidence that we are starting to see a lot more 12-year-old to 15-year-old Kentucky bourbon pop up on the sourced market. That's because people are trying to get capital. It's plain and simple. And it may be Barton, but it may not be owned by Barton. Those rights may be owned by someone else. And so like I'm consistently being hit up with somebody who has like 2,000 barrels of, 3-year-old Indiana bourbon. Like, hey, I've got 2,000 barrels. Can you help me move it? I'm like, I'm a fucking journalist. Leave me alone. But that stuff happens all the time.
Watch me on YouTube. I'm doing a blind tasting tonight. Tune in.
Damn right.
Well, awesome. Before we move on, anybody else have any kind of last comments on the Sazerac early times?
No, this will be good. It'll be interesting over the next few years, I think, especially as those stocks that they acquire start disappearing, right? What does that mean? Does Buffalo Trace try to change the whole brand signature taste? They try and mimic it? Do they create a whole new early times brand out of it? It'll be really interesting. But I think, if you love it right now, you still have a few years to stock up. But
what's interesting is, we haven't seen this happen a lot recently, but will we see a secondary market increase because, switching sources? So, will we start to see the ISO Brown-Forman early times bottled and bond?
Yeah. Guarantee it.
All right, ready to move on?
Let's
move on.
I'll get
Because you need put a new hat on. I think you should have a new hat for every segment, Ryan. I think that's how it works. Right. Wardrobe change. Be right back.
Who are we talking about next? Do I have an orphan barrel hat?
We're gonna start talking about just any kind of distilleries that are happening in Kentucky, because as with COVID and everything else, we've seen that now distilleries are starting to slowly open back up. Sazerac has started to open back up with Buffalo Trace in 1792. Wild Turkey starting to open back up. We've seen Four Roses Barrel Selection start to open up back up. However, their tours aren't open back up yet. So it's sort of hit and miss a little bit right now. But everybody here that's on the round table, well, of course, Ryan and Brian and Fred and myself, we all live in Louisville, so we know what it's like. But Blake and Jordan, you've both been on the trail before. So there's a lot of things that we see in the bourbon groups, and they're like, hey, I'm heading to Kentucky this week. We're going to get in our trail tour. Now, if you are a betting person and if you want to get the most out of your trail trip, is it a good time to do it, or should you wait? What do you get if you mix Seattle craft, Texas heritage, and Scottish know-how? That's Two Bar Spirits. Two Bar Spirits traces its roots to a ranch in rural Texas run by the founder, Nathan Kaiser's family, for 6 generations. Nathan grew up on the ranch with stories of relatives bootlegging moonshine. And after moving into Seattle, he wanted to keep the family tradition alive, and he opened Two Bar Spirits in 2012. They're a very traditional distillery, making everything from scratch, and each day starts by milling 1,000 pounds of grain. Their entire product lineup consists of only 2 whiskeys, their moonshine and the only bourbon made in Seattle. Both bottles are being featured in Rack House Whiskey Club's next box. Rack House Whiskey Club is a Whiskey of the Month club, and they're on a mission to uncover the best flavors and stories that craft distilleries across the U.S. have to offer. Rack House ships out 2 of the featured distillery's finest bottles, along with some cool merchandise in a box delivered to your door every 2 months. Go to rackhousewhiskeyclub.com to check it out and try some 2 Bar for yourself. Use code PURSUIT for $25 off your first box. Now, if you are a betting person and if you want to get the most out of your trail trip, is it a good time to do it, or should you wait?
I'll go first. I think it's an incredible time to go because I think the tours are going to be minimal and they'll be shorter. And those are the worst parts of the trips. And
you gotta remember, this is why people are going to it.
Yeah.
No. I think the best part are the tastings, and they're still doing those. And I think there's going to be less people. I think they're going to get more attention to it. I don't know. I think it could be a cooler experience now. Just because they've been pimped up, they're waiting for people to come, and I think I think it's still not going to be as busy as people want it to be. And so I think you're going to get a little more VIP service during this time.
You will get the full attention. You're right, Ryan. You nailed it, I think.
So I'll give it from a non-Louisvillian, non-Kentuckian standpoint. So I usually make it down to Kentucky, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times a year, right? And it's always fun. I think, and the answer to your question, Kenny, is going to be, it depends, right? It's going to depend on how comfortable, one, people feel traveling for themselves, but more so the type of experience you want, right? What Brian said, yeah, it's going to be a different, probably more VIP-like tour. And there's sometimes when you go down even during, normal times, and you might be at a distillery, right? You go to Willett, there's only 2 people there. It's almost getting a VIP tour. Mm-hmm. But part of what I like personally when I take friends down with me or meet them up is it's sometimes fun when there are a lot of people there too, because there's a whole different energy, right? When you see a whole crowd of people the first time going on their distillery tour, even if you've taken it 15, 20 times, it's really special to see as they learn something new. It's probably going to be their one time, maybe their only time in Kentucky at that distillery. And you kind of feed off that energy in the tour. Tours are also going to be really different, right? It's going to be different, not as intimate as it might have been. People are going to be spread out. You might be wearing a mask, right? So it's going to be a different experience. So it's really going to depend. I don't fault anyone if they want to go down right now. Everyone has been, cooped up for a long time. If they want to travel to Kentucky and experience it, just realize it's going to be different. And if you want to wait, that's completely okay too. It's just going to be 2 totally different tours. If you want to do it both, so you can compare and contrast, do that, right? The Kentucky economy could certainly use it. But there's pros and cons. It really depends. Do you want to feed off that energy, or are you looking for something a little bit more small and intimate, just realizing it's not going to be your typical experience whatsoever?
I'll kind of come at it from the business perspective of the distilleries. I've talked to a lot of the people who run tours and everything, and one of the big things that they're worried about is keeping their staff safe. You got to remember, these are working facilities, and they don't want someone veering off the tour and going into the still room where it's, nearly 200 degrees and the guy's in there cranking a knob, and suddenly someone from a tour decided to take their mask off because it's 200 degrees in there. And, they're now maybe potentially exposed. There's a lot of fear like that for the actual workers. And the other thing is like, how many times are we on Twitter and we're seeing like a mob go after somebody who's not wearing a mask? Everybody should be wearing a mask. Let me say that first. But do you want to be a business that gets associated with something like that that's trending on social media? I think it's really risky for these distilleries to take tours. And while I'm all for it, I think it's great. And in a perfect world, everybody's wearing a mask and following the rules. But we all know that that's not going to happen. There's going to be some dickhead who ruins it for everybody. And I genuinely fear that is what will happen, because Kentucky right now, man, we're hanging on by a thread with all the stuff that's been going on in this state. And, I think from a business perspective, I would be closed down until we had a vaccine on the market. And I would not risk it. And I would be focused on making whiskey. That would be my focus right now.
Right there with you, Fred. But also from that same business perspective, I think that's actually what's the business mindset's driving them to reopen almost, right? So Heaven Hill, the timing could not have been worse for these folks, right? Heaven Hill just opened up their new portion, their distillery tour experience. Woodford, right? Buffalo Trace is expanding. All these guys, due to the recent boom in bourbon, have dumped tons of money in just the in-person experience. And a lot of it culminated right around when COVID hit. So they're like itching now to start recouping costs that they sunk into this. So it's like this catch-22 they're in, because I'm right there with you, right? Personally, I won't be going down to Kentucky this year, which I'm really bummed about. But I understand why distilleries are gunning to open, because they're like, we just dumped all this money, right? They want to open the doors, they want to be welcoming, but it's this really catch-22.
Yeah, I saw a comment in there from Matt about more paperwork, and I think that's going to happen. I'm doing my first since February barrel selection on Friday, and the paperwork to do that barrel selection was I mean, I've never seen anything like that before for barrel selection. Normally, you make a few phone calls, you're on the list, you show up, and now it's a bunch of paperwork. It's rules about bringing your own glass, and there's not going to be any of the chips that are at a lot of these different barrel selections to break the palate. And there's going to be a tour that we do, so I'll be able to see what that tour is and have a little bit better idea to see if we're staying more outside. But they needed my home address. They needed all these other things. I'm sure they're going to take my temperature when we get there. So I think with these kinds of precautions, we'll see more distilleries opening up for tours. Now, the problem is everyone knows, and as Fred mentions, it's the first person who goes there and screws something up. It's just everything's going to shut down. I think it'll be an immediate shutdown. And for people who've done tours before where you get to stick your finger in the mash tub.
Oh, that's definitely done.
That's out. I mean, and that's one of my favorite things about these tours is tasting that. And it's all gonna. I don't know if people are gonna go to the sealed tubs like Beam has, or what's gonna happen
I don't
now.
think we'll be able to do that. I don't think.
But you're gonna get kicked out if you do that now.
But I mean, in all honesty, like, is there any
so.
risk of doing that? I mean, it's that the mash tun's going to a still that's going to be heated over 220 degrees, and
I'm sure some dirty ass people have put their fingers in those tubs before, and we've all been fine.
Well, I mean, I don't want to throw Jordan on the spot, but isn't there a story about a dead bird floating in a mash tub?
Yeah, okay, so that's a fun story. So now this bird was, I think, a non-bird flu bird. But yeah, there was a time when me and Nick, and it was one of those times we showed up at Willett, not a private tour. We just first thing in the morning. And me and Nick were there, and we happened to be the only ones on the tour. And we're going through, and it was, Willett's a gorgeous distillery. Stick our fingers in the mash tub. We taste it. Tour guide does the same thing. And right at that moment, I look over, and then the tour guide Nick look over with me, and there's a dead bird floating like 10 feet away from us in that same mash tub. We just look at each other, and we just walk on, and that was that.
Keep walking. Yeah.
That's it.
Keep going.
Well, in mezcal, they put chickens and all sorts of things in their fermentation. So dead animals have a long history in distillation, my friend.
And so one other thing to kind of talk, kind of like tack onto this here was, I had an opportunity to talk to another master distiller recently, and in their distillery, they're open for tastings, but they're not open for tours, and it's because it's a smaller distillery. And he said that if by some chance, if their staff got infected, they'd be losing about $1 million a day. So they are not going to open up tours anytime soon and just kind of keep it just tastings for the time being until anything does change.
His small distillery said if he lost his staff, he'd lose $1 million a day.
Medium-sized distillery.
That's going to say that's nearly a $500 million distillery. I mean,
a little guy called Buffalo Trace. You may have heard of him.
I think the tasting is the riskiest part because you're sharing glasses. Unless the consumers are bringing their own glasses. I mean, that would be here. Okay. I mean, I know this is a subject we're all tired of. Nobody really wants to talk about it, and there is an ample amount of people who don't believe in it. What's going on, and we've certainly been led to believe wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Mask isn't going to help. It's going to help. There's going to be a vaccine. There's not going to be a vaccine. We don't have a straight answer from anybody about anything, and so I understand why people are so cynical about this. But at the end of the day, there are so many facets about this, and and let's not forget the protests that are still going on in downtown Louisville. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that are happening around that's impacting these distilleries. And my God, I would not want to have to make those decisions because, look, we're on the outside. We're over here. We're talking. We're drinking whiskey. We're chatting it up. But our livelihood, while is connected to whiskey. We don't necessarily have $500,000 to $600 million invested into a distillery that we need human beings there looking at it. So, I mean, you have to make you have to make the best decision you can. And I just think that we're just jumping into it too fast. And we got to be careful about this because we don't know where it's going, and we don't know. And here's the thing: when I say too fast, like our governor will shut it down. Our governor will shut this all down the minute there is a reported case connected to a distillery, and then another distillery and another distillery. Our governor has proven that he is quick to react to try and protect this populace based on what he thinks is best. And so if you put that in there, you put that whole thing in a big old pile of legal mumbo jumbo. And, Brian, I don't know what you'd call it, but
I'll interpret it for you.
It's a big old heaping pile,
It's no fun to talk in reality, Fred.
So I guess this comes down to that if Fred was coming from Oklahoma, he would not go to Kentucky for his trail tour right now. Is that what it boils down to?
Oh no, I didn't say that. I totally would. I'd leave my camera in the car because, especially if I got a barrel pick lined up. But look, man, I know my people. I know my inner circle. People would respect whatever rules that would be there. So if you are planning to come, just make sure, even if they don't believe in them, just make sure that your friends are respecting the rules. As we did, in the military, we said, if your battle buddy screws up, it's your fault. So if you have a friend who's not following the rules of that respective distillery or the CDC measurements or whatever that's put on, whether or not you believe in them or not, follow them, because you will ruin it for the rest of us, because our governor will crack down the minute that there are cases tied to distilleries. And that is my final word on it, is that even if you don't believe in it, follow the rules based on the fact that that our government, our governing leaders will crack down if you don't.
So another bourbon topic, who's everyone voting for in November?
Oh, buddy.
I vote for Ryan Cecil.
Yep. Between you and Kanye, it'd be good running mates right there.
Yeah.
I'm his VP candidate.
Is he really running now? I mean,
we're not going to jump into it, Fred.
Let's not get into it. Let's not get into it.
Hey, listen, don't bait me, Blake.
Yeah,
don't I get a Kanye conversation.
Yeah.
I will say, because we get emails and questions all the time on social media, and they say, "Hey, I'm coming to Kentucky. Which distilleries to visit?" Right now, if you even contemplate and thinking about coming to visit, make sure you do your research and you get all your reservations made far in advance, because anything or any place that is open is taking online reservations. And word is they are filling up fast because they're at 50% or less capacity, social distancing, everything like that is going on. We also have our Yelp page where we have recommendations of all restaurants and things to do in Louisville. And I'd say about a quarter of those are not happening right now. So make sure that if you are looking for restaurants to go to or anything like that, odds are it's going to be just a little bit different. So just do your research. So
can we keep playing Fox News, CNN? I like it. It'd be fun.
We really just started on we started with haircuts. Now we're on to political conversations. I mean, we're
ADD tonight.
Yeah, I like it.
All right. Well, let's finish it with a fun question then. So everybody around here, we've all got bottles on the shelves, and we look at a bottle and we see the fill level. It might have like 2 ounces left, maybe 3, maybe even less than that. And what's your mindset? Do you go through and you have a feel that you need to finish them off, or do you want to keep them and savor that last sip?
So during COVID, not to bring it back to COVID, I actually went through and finished a bunch of them because my mindset was, I got to save those like last 2 pours for me and someone special. And then I was like, well, I'm never going to see anyone special. So, so I'm just going to drink it. And so I finished a lot of them, but I still have a few that I have those like 2 ounce pours just because I'm like, I can't finish it myself. I got to have somebody over to finish it with.
So I think for me it's interesting. So when I get to like that 2 to 3 ounce pour, I have no problem just pouring it and enjoying the bottle. It's when I have like 2 to 3 pours left, right? So I have like 6 to 7 ounces. It's when I kind of stop and I'm like, oh, okay, I can pour this for myself and 1 or 2 other people. Like, let me just hold on to it a little longer. Let me hold on to it a little longer. When there's just a pour left, I'll just pour it. So I have all these bottles. They have like, 2 to 3 glasses left that I'm like, boy, well, I'll just drink something else instead. I'll keep saving it for when people come over or something like that. It just doesn't happen. So like I think everyone's threshold of when do they just stop and when do they drink it is a little bit different, which is interesting.
Yeah, I've been finishing them. They I had a few that I'd been hanging on to, and they're all gone now in the last 3 months. I mean, it's one thing it's helped you learn is just enjoy it. And we do driveway drinking on Friday nights with the neighbors on the court, and so I've brought them out for that. So I still get a little bit of a chance to share, but enjoying people.
Absolutely.
So I guess I'm the only one who just leaves their bottles like, 1 pour left in them. And I'm like, I'll save that for a special occasion. And then I'm just on to another bottle. And I said at the beginning of the show, I don't even know if we're live yet, but I was like, let me see what I want to drink. And there's, 10 different bottles with probably 2 ounces left in them. I'm not going to drink from those bottles. I'm not going to kill a bottle because I don't know. I don't know if it's FOMO or like, when it's gone, it's gone. It's failure or a fear of commitment or what. But I'm on that train. I can't just finish a bottle off.
Yeah, I kind of had that same thing a little bit not too recently ago. Is I had like a 1970s like wild turkey, and I had it like during COVID. I mean, I had like this much left, and I think I had it with Ryan a few times, and I was just waiting just for just somebody to come over so we could kill this thing. And it's just one of those things. I have that same feeling too, that if you have a really good bottle, you're sitting there just like waiting for that one last pour to just share with somebody else instead of just like, well, Friday night, I'm on my 9th pour. I might as well just go ahead.
Might as well knock it out.
Yeah, just go ahead
Or
and take
Tuesday
this one down
or
too.
Wednesday or whatever.
I'll say you guys have the luxury, from what I hear, that your significant other does not drink bourbon. Am I right in that?
Yes.
Yes.
There is not
the
a
same bourbon. Yeah.
That's the same bourbon. All right. So there is not a bottle in my house that I want and continue to want that my wife will not just tear down when I'm out, I'll be out like recording a live stream, and I'll look over right before I'm about to go on, and she takes a selfie with like the Bardstown Bourbon Company Discovery Series 2, which made my whiskey of the year list, and she's like, I'm about to drink this right here, and she's in her little runner groups that she has these like drinking with runner. I'm a runner. I'm a drinker with a running problem. She's in all these groups like that.
It's really hard to keep your Glencairn not spilling when you're doing that, huh?
Yeah. But she's like, she like destroys the bottles when I get them to about right there. And it's cute, but also kind of annoying because I want to finish it.
Well, I know that because you've nursed that Michter's 20 for almost like 6 or 8 months, and every time I see it in the videos, it's just a hair smaller, but it still makes it in there.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is I have to like have these really good bottles for the artists. Like, Lee Brice is my favorite country singer, and his episode came out today, and I sent him some A.H. Hearst 16-year-old from the 1974. So.
I guess I should have gotten a record label before I met you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on, Lee Brice is a bourbon drinker?
Big time, yeah. He's actually connected to a brand. He's got a brand. But yeah, so anyway, I do find like with Dusties, like if there's just a little bit left in a Dusty, I won't touch it because it will be like it'll be a little bit calcified and like oxidated. Like if you are a Dusty drinker and you're planning to like in my experience, like the minute it gets down to like mid-label, you got to kill it or have it like specially decanted.
All right. So if you want to make it on Fred's good list, go ahead, get out there, get yourself a record label deal, sell it, go platinum, get on his podcast. All of a sudden, you're going to have a 1970s Dusty end up on your doorstep. So
That's all you need to do.
it's the easy way to success. I mean, he couldn't have made it a little bit more crystal clear for you. All right, let's go ahead and let's close this out. So I want to say thank you all again for coming on the show tonight. I think we hit a lot of good topics. I think that haircut thing was great. We got to figure out a way to incorporate that into some sort of signage or something one day. I don't know if it's a big sticker or next roundtable sticker.
I think it's a sticker for the next private barrel.
Yeah, I think it's a sticker.
Community, yeah.
But something's got to come out of that. But let's go ahead.
See Fred riding a bull and Jordan with rat tail lightning together.
Yeah.
By the way, I know the agent of Rat. So like John Henderson brought up in the chat, he's like, all right, Rat's got to be, the band Rat's got to be a part of it. So I'll see if I can make it happen.
There we go.
All right. So let's go ahead and start closing this out. So Jordan, I'll let you go first.
Sure. This is Jordan from BreakingBourbon.com, one of the three guys who runs the site. You can find us at Breaking Bourbon on all the socials. You cannot find us with rat tails anymore, unfortunately. But, if this goes on long enough, maybe I'll start growing them back.
All right, Blake.
Yeah, once again, I'm Blake from Bourboner. Thanks for having me. Always fun. Always enjoy talking with you guys. And, even when we kind of skew off topic a little bit and venture into other worlds, it's always a good time. So thanks for having me. You can find me at all the social medias, BOURBONR.com. And, be back next month.
All right, Brian, go ahead.
All right. Thanks for having me on again. Brian with Sippin' Corn. You find me at bourbonjustice.com and on the socials, all at Sippin' Corn. Had a fun time tonight, and I'll let everybody know about the barrel selection this Friday. It's one that I can't tell you where it is because, as far as I know, it's the first pick of this label ever.
If the distillery was to shut down, how many millions of dollars would they lose in a day?
Let me do the math.
It's got to be a Pappy 20-year release. That's what I'm thinking.
Private barrel Pappy.
So is it in Kentucky?
The first
is it in Kentucky, Brian?
It is in Kentucky.
Is it the first for the brand or the first for the distillery?
First for this brand.
Okay.
It's the first early times from Buffalo Trace.
Yep, it's the early times private selection with wax top.
Ooh.
Oh, I could totally see Brian getting the first early times from Sazerac.
They called me right away.
Sazerac loves Brian, don't they? Didn't he do the?
All right. Well, I guess everybody's gonna have to wait and hear that news at a later date.
Next month. Yep.
There we go. All right. I've conducted this train long enough. Cecil, you want to close it out?
Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and appreciate you all joining in. I know it takes a lot out of your schedules to come join with us, so appreciate everyone, and we'll see you next week.